You are invited to the nuptials of Cassandra Goth and Warren Pootysims at the Church of the Bleeding Heart of Jesus. Please RSVP. Cassandra had said yes, and we made our way down the aisle. I had to whisper to her that I would most likely need a map before the day was through. She smiled and asked why. I told her because I keep getting lost in her eyes. She laughed. The minister was a friend of the man who had presided over the funerals of both my wife and child as well as my dear Mrs. Penny Biggles. We exchanged the vows we had written together, and it was she who placed the ring on my finger. Her fellow girlfriends from university were in attendance, but I had no one, as my identity was quite a secret. We kissed, as was a custom at such events, and started our new life together. Cassandra had insisted we move into her family home, the incredibly beautiful house on the hills overlooking Willow Creek. I agreed. She promised to completely redecorate it, as it was a bit stuffy. I offered my option. Perhaps some new flooring. She smiled. I explained to her finally what my job with the agency was. That I was not assigned to police duties any further, and I was now a secret agent with the Federal Security Agency. She was not surprised. How else could I ever explain how I was able to perform such amazing stunts of valor and save the entire Sims world from alien destruction? I laughed. I told her it was luck. And she whispered, did I want to get even luckier? Who was I to say no? I asked her if it had hurt. She looked at me with a puzzled expression. When you fell from heaven, did it hurt? We both giggled as school children. I suggested perchance the wedding day woohoo would be in order, and we went to our room. After savoring the benefits of marriage, I decided to spend some time searching the YouTube for interesting videos. I do enjoy watching TC's World. A 40-year challenge is quite entertaining. I finished and started to peruse the local news offerings. It seemed that an officer had been killed that evening in cold blood. A young first-year chap assigned to Windenburg Station who was on his first walkabout through town. His mission? To protect and serve the residents of Sims. There was no viable suspect, and the police were challenged for any reason as to why. It intrigued me. I sent a brief message to my old comrades at Windenburg Station. I would like to extend an offer of my help in the matter, if they wished. They heartily accepted my offer. I decided to wander to the site of the crime to lend my sight to the search for a clue. I went to Cassandra and begged for her forgiveness. I would be leaving to look into a matter of importance to me. She smiled. I suppose I shall have to get used to such things now, she said, and then with a hearty grin she said, off with you then, Detective Pootysims. And maintain proper care of yourself if you please. I turned and left, counting the long hours till I would return to her arms. I left immediately to investigate and begin my searching for a clue and a reason. I arrived at the site of the murder. I scouted the immediate area for anything of help. It seemed like there was nothing of value there to be found. Why had anyone taken the life of such a promising young man? Was it a single shooter? An errant group of sissy lads seeking some form of perverse fun? Was it a jealous lover or even a lover's rival? The questions in a case like this can lead you to many assumptions. And as you may remember, I definitely hated to assume anything. I would have to find a way to get into the mind of the killer, or killers, to find the answers. It was never a pleasant task. I began the next day with a reading of the newspapers online. It was such a convenient way to gather the news, this internet, and I was a bit taken aback by it. Another young officer was the victim of a senseless murder that very night. In the Willow Creek Park. He was on patrol and had been ambushed. Cassandra entered the room and watched me reading. She saw the article I was studying, and she expressed her worry. Was I involved in the investigation? Had that been my reason for leaving? I tried to reassure her that it was indeed a rather interesting case. There were no reasonable explanations now for 2 officers killed in as many days. I said that I felt a strong obligation to utilize the resources available to me to help find the answers. I would be careful, I said. You had better, Mr. Pootysims, she replied. She was worried, and rightly so, I'm afraid. And rightly so. If someone could murder a police officer in cold blood, then no Sims was safe. I left to go to the headquarters of the investigation services I was a member of. I made my way to the director's office. They were in conference, and expressed agitation I would just walk in unannounced. I said it was important, and they succumbed to my temperament. Congratulations were delivered for my ending the aliens' plans of conquest. How was I able to do it? I stifled my grin, and never a mention of my Cassandra or her crew of misfits would be known. I said, perchance it was luck. Luck indeed, said the director. I laid bare my reason for the visit. Someone, or a group of someones, was killing officers in the cities of Sims. Might I use the computer to search for clues? They reluctantly agreed, with the stipulation that I was once again on my own. They were not provided to assist, and my participation was solely voluntary. I agreed. I cross-referenced all the data and looked for any type of connection to, well, anything. There were no other instances in any of the surrounding games. Nothing in Sims 2 or 3 matched the crimes. It was a dead end to peruse anything but what was occurring here and now, in my world. I decided to enlist one of my grilled cheese informants. He was a bit cocky at first, and claimed he had no information to share with me on any topic. I became angry at his expressing a sick glee over the young officers' deaths, and I quickly nailed him with 5 across the eyes. Remember your place, little junkie, and check that attitude. Did he know of anything that might help me? He said no. I told him in no uncertain terms that I would find these criminals, and no one would prevent me from eliminating him if the need be. Cassandra wanted a night out for a regal supper. I relented, and rather looked forward to an evening with her. We went to the Countess Martigue's, a restaurant frequented by the higher society of Sims. We took seats at the bar to await our table. She noticed my glances at the opulent surroundings, and politely reminded me that I was now married to a rather wealthy woman of means. I laughed. It was something a poor Sim detective had never considered. Our table was announced, and we sat together. We both recalled our first date at the restaurant she had referred me to, while she was but a university lass. I said I did indeed remember, and with little Eliza I was quite sure I would not ever forget. She laughed joyously. Yes indeed, you randy bastard. I looked and looked at her, and I knew, as clearly as I know that I will die, that I loved her more than anything I had ever seen or imagined on earth. She could fade and wither, I didn't care. I would still go mad with tenderness at the mere sight of her face. We all have such fateful objects. It may be a recurrent landscape in one case, a number in another, carefully chosen by the gods to attract events of specific significance for us. Such was my love for Cassandra. We finished our supper and I was taken that no check arrived. She again laughed. It would be billed you silly twit, you must let me take you out more often. We left and prepared for a nice walk about town together. We kissed and melted into each other for a moment of pure bliss. Cassandra's eyes gleamed with a mischievously scented glare. Might I have overlooked the surrounding bushes of the restaurant? She smiled coyly, and perhaps a bit of an impromptu woohoo in a spot that might prove as found out. Who was I to not be the randy bastard of her yesterday's recollection? We both snuck into the bushes like school children on a holiday. That night, as another bobby patrolled the streets, like clockwork the murderer struck again. This time in the city of Forgotten Hollow. In the main turnaround of the center. He was shot and abandoned as the killer ran from the scene. A sickening pattern was emerging here in Sims. Whether we wanted it or not. The following morning, we both slept in, rather exhausted by the night's activities and the consumption of such a rich meal. It was Cassandra who awoke first and went to prepare herself for her morning ritual. She slipped out of bed so to not awake my slumber. Such an unselfish goddess was she. I soon felt her absence and awoke. I heard her scurrying about, and decided to prepare a nice breakfast for the family. Little Eliza would be up soon, and we all could have a breakfast together. To my surprise, Cassandra joined me in the preparations of our meal. I had no idea that such a, well, spoiled little brat of a girl could even cook a meal. But here she was, busily mixing and slicing our favorite bangers and clucks with some toast and jam. Excellent choice for a day's beginning. We both handily maneuvered the cooking utensils, and before you could say Bob's your uncle, the meal came together famously. I was impressed, and mentioned she might take over the cooking for the household. She laughed. No, that would not be an option, my dear Mr. Pootysims. We finished and went to eat, as Eliza had made her hunger known. It was a happy moment in an anticipated bad day. Eliza sat on a chair, as she explained that she was not to use the high chair further. She was a big girl now. Yet as she couldn't reach the table, she was content to sit and eat in the big girl's chair. Mind you don't spill your plate, Cassandra said. And be a good girl and clean up. Eliza smiled her devilish grin. She took the opportunity to discuss her latest fancy. Were either of us aware that Iceland was green and Greenland was covered with ice? I was never ceased to being amazed at her highly developed intellect. A direct result of her alien side, I was sure. Cassandra attributed it to my own superior intellect, but I knew she was just being kind. Compared to the two of them, I was a mere idiot. I gathered the plates from the table, and Eliza, not quite finished, deposited her own plate on the table for me to clean. a rather noble attempt at granting her mother's request. She then proceeded to inform Cassandra that she would dearly enjoy a nice bubble bath, if you please. Cassandra laughed, and with a flourish of love, gathered her up and went straight away to the tub. I went to sit in the parlor, on the divan, when I received a call. It was the station. Another murder, this time in Forgotten Hollow. I said I would be right there. I left to dress for the day, and checked my revolver was at the ready. It looked to be another hard day. I was met by another officer at the scene. He filled me in on the events that had claimed another policeman's life that evening. The killer struck in the wee hours of the morning, with no discernible witnesses about to see him. He was cunning, and he seemed to have an ability to strike without warning. I wondered if he might appear so average that the officers simply mistook him as a resident of the area. He did appear to have a vast knowledge of the surrounding cities of Sims. He had killed in each one, and not left any trace of evidence. As there were no shell casings of asset to us in investigating his method of murder, he left no prints of any kind behind, and the thought that he was apparently sure of his not being identified was a sour note for me. Why? The burning question that was there for all to see. Why had he chosen to randomly murder the officers charged with safety? It was puzzling indeed. I called the Windenburg station. I would be arriving there soon, I informed them. I needed to continue my search and would like the use of their local computer system. They were happy to oblige me and anticipated my arrival shortly. They said they would put the kettle on, so to speak. At the station I chatted with the officer in reception. He was glad I had joined in the investigation, having already heard of my exploits in the grilled cheese matter. The new chief inspector would like to see me as soon as possible, if I would be so inclined. I went to his office and greeted him. He was a rather nice chap and welcomed my help. He assured me that any and all resources in his department were at my disposal. I thanked him. What did he make of the crimes? He had no clue as to why, but he felt sure it must be related to law enforcement in Sims. Someone held a deadly grudge against the officers. They must be exacting a sort of revenge on them. Random, yes. But seemingly with purpose. I suspected he was right and would follow that lead. He expressed admiration to me for my handling of the grilled cheese debacle that had claimed the life of his predecessor, the old chief inspector. He said no one had an inkling of suspicion of his involvement. I said that I too had been fooled. He had placed me on the grilled cheese case hoping I was too stupid to solve it, and when I had begun to come closer to him, he had welcomed my distraction into the Sims slasher case. They had not been related, but he had assumed I would follow that lead over the grilled cheese case. It had been his downfall. He had assumed too much, a bad rate to allow. He asked of the slasher case, but I said perchance another time would be more welcome. I left to study the facts. I next went to the surrounding neighborhood of Forgotten Hollow. I would try to interview the residents close to the scene. I went to the house of Lilith Vator. She met me on the steps and was quite stern on her answers. No, she had not heard anything of note that night. Besides, she explained, she was somewhat of a night owl and she worked at night away from home. Anyway, she was not home that night, but rather searching for, work-related activities. A rather darkly strange woman. She said that if she could be of further service, perhaps I could come round some night. Say, around midnight or so. I smiled. Perhaps so night I may pay her a visit. She broadly smiled. That day a young reporter for the Sims newspaper named Jeremy Newsman was busy at his desk. He was compiling a story on the recent deaths of the officer in Forgotten Hollow when he received an unexpected text message. It said, "I can make you famous." "Indeed," he replied. "How so?" The answer was a curt pick a number between 5 and 10. He answered with 7. "Good," came the reply, "another 4 it is." He was puzzled. Could this be from the killer at large? He went directly to his manager. A wise old newspaper fellow. The manager's office was down the long corridor of the building. It was a rather palatial office ordained with certificates of accomplishment and awards of reporting proses. He requested entrance and was granted an audience. He quickly showed him the received texts. His boss was intrigued. Might it be a message from the killer? Interesting. The numbers were leading in that direction. 3 officers had been murdered. Should I attempt to follow up on it? He asked. But of course, replied his mentor, follow any and all leads that seem like it might sell a paper. Where might he be suggested to go to follow this new twist? His manager thought a bit. He had himself been involved with the grilled cheese story and the accompanying slasher extra. He suggested he might pull a string or two and send him to a Detective Pootysims. He had a vast knowledge of crime and maybe of help. He called me, and I agreed to meet him in the pub at Willow Creek. I was going to meet with my old comrade later that afternoon. Would he care to join me now? He said yes, indeed he would. I made my way to the pub and found him waiting patiently at a table. Might he buy me scotch and sodas? I declined. I was working, you see. Perhaps later. What could I be of service to him for? He told me of the texts. Might they be from the killer? I thought it might be too good to be true. Finally the killer had shown his hand. He wanted recognition for his acts. It showed he was feeling vulnerable in his attempts. No one was looking at him. He wanted some sort of triumphant cheering from the crowd. I told my young reporter friend that it showed he was truly demented, and he should exercise caution if he was to be offered a meet with the texter. He asked if he might run the story in the evening paper. I said yes, it would placate the madman, and allow him to, possibly, let his guard down a bit. He asked of the grilled cheese investigation, and how I had almost single-handedly foiled the chief inspector plan. I said it was all accomplished with the help of my fellow officers and not myself alone. He then asked what of the slasher? Had it ever been solved? I replied that when the grilled cheese network had been broken, the killing had stopped. That was all he needed to know, as the truth was still a state secret. Had I heard of the terrorists bombing the Eiffel Tower in France? Yes, I had heard something of it. He thanked me for my time and we parted. I was in a bit of a pickle mo. The killer was about to be a mainstream news event, and I was no closer to finding him. I would withhold my involvement from the press. No need to give notice to the killer that I was on the case now. Decided to try my luck with a bit of fishing. I went to a nice pond on the outskirts of the city. It was quiet and deserted. It offered me a chance to reflect on the events so far. I fancied myself casting my line into the waters of Sims and catching the evil that dwelled just below the surface. The murderer would nibble on my hook, and I would snatch him up. I merely need the proper bait, and maybe the newspaper would provide it for me. Something caught my hook, and I reeled it towards me. Unfortunately I was only rewarded with a large clump of weeds. How very ominous a sign. I next decided a bit of a workout would be in order. I had neglected my physical training as of late, and I wanted my strength and reflexes to be primed for any event. I chose to perform the epic workout routine. A hard pull, but it had its rewards. I pressed on. I was having a go at it when I was humorously struck by another fellow exercising on the treadmill. He was practicing his running skills. He seemed hell-bent on running for a marathon event. I pulled and strained on the heavy weights. I would require a nice rub-down from Cassandra that night, if she so felt inclined. I may have mistaken my strength as the weights seemed quite heavy, but that is the luck of the draw. I had, again, Assumed I could handle it. I hate to assume anything, as you know, dear listener. The running fellow must have misjudged his pace and slipped a bit. It was funny, I must say, and I chuckled under my breath. He must have been quite embarrassed, as he sheepishly looked around for anyone watching him. I allowed him his mistake. We all make mistakes. I showered and went home. As you can see, Cassandra had resurfaced the dark floors. It looked a bit hommier to me now. I went to little Eliza and thought of a topic to discuss with her that wouldn't show my ignorance too badly. She smiled and began a dissertation of her newest discoveries. It seems that if you could estimate the geomagnetic pull of the planet's core to the oscillation of the moon's orbit, you would discern that it was distancing itself from us by a small ration each year. Soon, in time, it would be completely free of Earth's orbit. She did have a way of making me feel quite undereducated. She listened as I explained that the adjustment of the moon's orbit would have dire consequence for the planet. And we should hope that it might not happen for quite a while. Silly daddy, she laughed, it wasn't due to affect anything for at least several million years yet, and the human species had not yet perfected extensive longevity. I asked what that might mean. She smiled. It meant the human would most likely destroy themselves long before it would become an issue. She was a bit scary at time. I counted that it was time for little girls to be put to sleep, for the evening was getting long. She asked me to read a book to her. Jeremy had begun to work on a new article for the paper. He then received the horrific news. Another killing had been reported. This time it was near a local pub in the Oasis Springs neighborhood. His boss had received the same report. He was keen to assign this new wrinkle to his prize reporter. He was instructed to proceed to the crime scene as quickly as possible and attempt to secure an interview with me. He was to make good use of his haste, as the public thirst for news was always tempered with the fact that by and large the public had a short memory. It was paramount that swiftness be used, to secure a maximum profit margin for the paper. He was disappointed a bit that his mentor was solely concerned with capital income over the tragic loss of life. It was dawning on him the true meaning of capitalism was profit over concern. We met at the crime scene. He was eager to question me on anything of value. He asked me to share my thoughts. I laughed. I would share my thoughts with him, but not anything of real value, and I told him so. It might compromise the investigation. He smiled and accepted my offer. We went to the scene of the officer's demise. It had been committed in a surrounding with access to people seeing the killer. He was becoming sloppier now. His thoughts gave way to his impulses, and he was not quite following any rational plan. I received the news that another body had been found. Another officer was murdered not far from this one. In the Oasis Springs Park. I went there to investigate and was quickly followed by Jeremy. What was I to make of this? He asked. It seemed the killer was becoming more dangerous. His demented thoughts were pushing him to kill. Why? What was his motivation? I could not say. Lost in his own world, the killer wallowed deeply in his cause. He felt secure he was on a mission. He thought of his next move. He would rest and prepare for another night's killing. One by one, he was sure to punish all those he deemed had wronged him. They would all pay for his pain. I met up with Jeremy and my old college friend. He had some news for me but insisted that it not be reported by the young newspaperman. Jeremy agreed. He was showing a character we had both never seen in a reporter. He had gained our trust. My friend explained that the analysis of the paint from Eliza's accident had been completed. It was a custom paint reserved for certain individuals by special order. It had been ordered by Mortimer Goth for his car collection. For what vehicle he could not say. He expressed heartfelt sorrow over Eliza's death and said I could rest now as it had been Mortimer all along, and he was dead from his suicide at the penitentiary. He went on with the next news for me. They had secured closed-circuit camera footage of the killing at the pub. There were good images of the killer's face now and they were processing it with the latest software. He felt they might have a working image of his face soon. Was I interested in viewing the results? I said I was and left, leaving the two to converse further. I hoped that there would be finally a break in identifying this madman. And I was not quite convinced that the car was driven by Mortimer. I went to the station and was quickly followed by the young reporter. Was this the break I was searching for or another clump of weeds attached to my line? What of this connection of Mortimer Goth to my wife's recent death? I brushed off his query and he requested I consider giving him the exclusive story of her accident in the future. I said I would give his request all the attention it deserved. He accepted my answer and bid I forgive his line of questions. I assured him it was not of concern to me. He was just doing his job, as I was mine. We made steps to the nearest computer terminal. I accessed the closed-circuit camera footage of the crime scene. It did indeed offer a look at the killer's face, though masked by his choice of attire. The newest software available would peel away the coverings to expose his face to us. I looked closely at his face. I had seen someone similar to this. Where? I thought back to my recent activities. I had gone fishing. No. No one was there. I had gone to the gym. It struck me. That feeling I get in my bones. The man who was running from the devil on that treadmill. The one who was constantly glancing about. He had looked at me and I had a good recollection of his attire. The seemingly same hat and those sunglasses he wore. Could he have been there right in front of me? I shuddered. We made a quick jaunt to the gym for some answers. At the gym I asked if they had closed-circuit cameras there. The attendant said yes, but only in the workout areas. For insurance purposes, he explained. There were no such devices in the showering or locker rooms areas. That was a good idea, I said. I would need a copy of the day and time that I had been there. He hesitated. He suggested I might return with a search warrant for the item. I laughed and bluntly I reminded him of my ability to arrest him for obstruction, let alone I just might severely beat him about the head and shoulders for good measure. We left with the tapes. I hurriedly returned to the station. At the station I immediately entered the new camera footage from the gym. They did indeed have a camera focused on the treadmill. I entered the programming sequence to extract his face. It was a good image. I would be able to isolate his features from it. I next entered the still image found on the tapes from the murder. His face too was acceptable for processing. I entered the keystrokes and began the programming to extrapolate his actual face and cross-referenced them. It was a match. And I had his face. I entered it into the system for identification. I was astounded by the results. He was Jaime Stinklebottom. He was the son of the chief inspector I has shot in the caverns below Willow Creek. I returned to the gym again. I needed to see the members listing for that day. The report came in. Another officer down. This time it was in Willow Creek, at the location of the hollow tree that led to the underground caverns that had been used for the manufacture of grilled cheese. It was where the chief inspector had taken my Eliza as a hostage. It was where I had shot him dead, without remorse. Things were spiraling out of control for our little serial cop killer now. I was so close I could taste his desperation. I was met by the responding office. She was awaiting the coroner to claim the body. The killer had struck in broad daylight this time. He must have felt the impending sword over his head. Or he was just batshit crazy at this point. It mattered not to me. He would be going down soon. To the penitentiary if their courts prevailed. To hell if I had my way first. I viewed the body. Another young officer had paid the price for his profession. Such a waste. I spoke with kindness to the officer in attendance. I wished her all the luck in her future endeavors. We all descended on the now known address of the suspect. Every available officers from the surrounding Sims townships was sent to assist. We raided the house in force. He was gone. The officers searched for clues. We found his case of unused 9mm bullets, with several missing. It pained us all to know they were most likely used to kill the officers in his spree. I was putting it together. He was after me. He couldn't get my whereabouts due to the secretive nature of my current job. I was the target of his revenge for killing his father. Then it hit me. He now might know my location through the newspaper articles on the killings. Had he killed all these officers with the intent of drawing me into the case, and finding my new life? I felt a terrifying fear growing within me now, that he might be coming for me. I was not home, but Cassandra and little Eliza were. I made a hasty dash for my house on the hills of Willow Creek. I had assumed I was safe there. Triple idiot that I was. I didn't listen to my own advice. I entered and yelled for Cassandra. Hearing no reply, I rushed upstairs. She lay on the bedroom floor. I was overcome with the remembrance of seeing Eliza dead in the street. To my complete joy, she was but unconscious and rose to cling to me. Someone had rendered her unconscious and taken the baby. Who would do such a thing? And why? Where had they taken her baby? She wailed. I tried to calm her down, but she began insisting she would call on her crew of mutations to crush them for their actions. I assured her that no, I would find her. And I knew where she would be. I left her and quickly headed to the spot I knew held my assailant's fixation. The very chamber I had killed his father in. The caverns beneath the city. I rushed to the hollow tree with one goal in mind now. I knew how this would end. I entered the cavern. He was not expecting me to figure out his location so quickly. I quickly looked in all directions. Then I saw him. He was still unaware of my presence and was mumbling to himself. I ran to him. His incoherent babblings echoed through the cavern and masked my approach. I leapt on him and gathered him in an unbreakable chokehold. He struggled. It was to no avail. I held him. He said I was the cause of his pain, I was to reason for his killing. All police were guilty of his father's death. All will pay there. His voice fell silent. I released him and he fell to the ground. I called for Eliza. She was unharmed. She was playing contentedly in another part of the cavern and came to my voice. Before whisking her away, I had one last duty to perform. It was quickly dispatched. I returned Eliza to her mother. She was overjoyed, and slyly claimed she had expected no other outcome from me. What had I done to the assassin? I produced my hidden method of justice I had used on the little bastard. He would trouble the Sims no more. She looked at Eliza closely. And what was this new hairstyle on her child, she asked. Well, I explained. She had wanted a haircut like Daddy, and who was I to refuse such a request from a princess? And a new outfit, I see, Cassandra said with a grin. And what of Mrs. Pootysims? Is there a present for the Queen? We entered our home and she went to put our little alien Eliza to bed straight away. I shall never get used to this marriage to a vile secret agent, she chirped from the next room. I smiled. I prepared a bath and felt the need to wash the sins of my actions away. I called to her. Come hither, my queen. Here to let me wash away any fears you might have of my love. And so the story comes to an end. It was a relief to all the Sims of Sims 4 that the killer was now dead. A rather happy Jeremy got his exclusive and a nice bonus. And it seemed that everyone was content to play the game for another day. As am I. Stay safe, my friends. Until next time.